once was Calistarius. He has been dead for many years. I stand in his place with death in my right hand, darkness in my left, and I would know who this is who bears the name Mephiston.
Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of the day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise man at their end know dark is right. Because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave, by crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light.
I am the steel in the blade. I am the blood in the heart. I am the heat of the flame. I am the blood of Sanguinius, Calistarius, Chief Librarian of the Bloodied Host, Consul Etheric to Commander Dante, the embodiment of the infamous Black Angel. The tales are true. However furious the fight, the usual hunger does not haunt him. His heart's no longer pound with those terrible lusts. He has escaped the doom of the chapter. He became unfettered, free to finally prove their nobility. He has the power to avert the grim fate that hangs over all of them. This slow, gnawing decline. This gradual death. But who is Mephiston? Who was Calistarius? And how did he become the Lord of Death? His story begins in the 41st millennium. At the edge of the Ultima Segmentum lie a cruel, uncaring world, rust orange and littered with the scars and ruins of a grander age. It would be on the planet of Baal Primus that a child would be born, one who took his first breaths of the radiated, dusty hellscape. Life within the spheres of the Baalite system was brutal, doomed to exist on worlds that had once been paradises, lives of luxury and peace millennia before. But yet, in our hubris, in our petty infighting and fear, the cautionary tale humanity repeats. Baal and its 2 moons were ravaged by civil war. Cultures and cities glassed by weapons so destructive they did not belong in mortal hands. From the skies rained down the shards of the great orbital structures that had once been a monument to humanity's great potential. Radiation and rust flowed over the survivors of the Age of Darkness, until as each generation was born, more and more of the wealth and knowledge bled out. What remains is a people, even to the 41st millennium, who dwell within simple brick and mortar villages, others as roaming tribes that brave the wastes and deserts of this now thirsty world. The young child was born to one of the many Baalite tribes that had found refuge within the caves and mountains of Baal Primus. Overlooking the wastes, streaked with lines of garish salt, Kali was his name, who found that on top of the radiation and monstrous creatures that stalked the rust deserts, he was the son to a cruel father. Dressed in simple rags, that one of the very few possessions he would ever own, alongside a primitive knife and a necklace of human hair with a piece of coloured glass threaded on. Kali, like all the others, would do his best just to survive. He had nothing. His people had nothing except their stories, their myths, the binding glue that united them as family. Young Kali and every child under the haunting red light of Baal's dying sun knew the tale. The great angel Sanguinius, the son of a god, born with angels' wings, who guarded the people of Baal. Sanguinius was the ideal. Even to young Kali, the stories of this mythological being was a story told and retold for centuries, filled with all the grace of human error. Young Kali's life was in danger, be it the radiation, the monsters in the dark, or his cruel father, until he was saved. A strange figure took him away from a family he would never see again. The hunched, malnourished man of Baal had saved Kali because he was special, born with something many would consider a gift, and more, a curse. Kali's mind was linked to the immaterium, the warp, and this intrinsic, otherworldly perception. He was a psyker. Nightmares haunted him. He saw horrors he could not even verbalize. He heard the thoughts of others. His mind was linked to the ocean of sentient thought in a way most would never grasp. It was a power that he could tap into, a power that had the potential to warp his mind, turn his body into a mess of mutating flesh. It was a power he was taught to harness and control by the mysterious old figure that had taken him in. For a time where they dwelled in the mountains that were the remains of these orbital facilities millennia before, fallen from grace as humanity itself. Kali grew, until the time came that the mysterious figure knew was inevitable. They descended from the sky, birds of metal, the most incredible thing the boy had ever seen. Stepping out onto the dust stood these enormous figures, clad in armor, so beautiful they approached him. Even some with a brilliant cobalt blue armor. They were the figures of myth. They were the sons of Sanguinius, the blood angels. It was like a hero of mythology had appeared before Kali. The sight made his mind spin and his little heart race. They were perfect. Others upon this world had sensed the boy's connection to the warp, a disposition that only allowed for two choices: execution, sentenced to the dreaded black ships that would make their way to the distant throne world of terror, to be fuel for the god emperor of mankind, or elevation into a son of Sanguinius himself. Kali was taken to Baal Secundus, the moon, home to where the angel Sanguinius had fallen from the sky, alongside dozens or even hundreds of other young aspirants from the system of Baal. The trials had begun. A place at the side of the angels of blood was earned. Through an enormous desert, Kali and the other aspirants trekked. Many would never return, either starving to death, attacked by spine-chilling fire scorpions, or swallowed by the deceptive thirst water oases. With their stomachs in pain from thirst, their fingernails and hair caked in dirt, the survivors arrived at the place of challenge. Gladiatorial trials began. Young aspirants fought until only the strongest remained. Death, now not something they avoided, but dealt in their very hands. In vigil, Kali and the survivors were forced to stay awake for 72 hours without rest. For those who failed, an unspeakable fate awaited. With the weakness in their bodies cold, Kali and the survivors proving their strength, their will to survive. As the tribals of Baal, they were used to a harsh life, but what came next would test their soul. A chalice, said to contain a portion of the angel's very own blood. Kali partook of the divinity, his own blood mixing with that of a legend, the earth-shattering importance not lost upon him. And then, for a boy who had only known vast deserts, open air and freedom, he was placed inside a cold, claustrophobic sarcophagus. All that Kali had endured, everything that he was, everything that he had done, would be the actions of a mortal, entering into a sleep so utterly deep, it was as if he was dead. Kali lay there for an entire year, and if he emerged, he would be something new, something greater, a son of Sanguinius, a blood angel. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. The wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had fought no lightning. They do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Screams and chants could be heard from the aspirants in their sarcophagi. What was coursing through their minds were visions, glimpses of the life of a demigod, the nobility and the darkness, blossoming for months. Many would not survive, driven mad, or ripped apart from the inside as the blood of a demigod failed to mix with their nature, raging against the dying of their own light. But Kali did not go gently into that good night. As he tussled and fought, his soul tested, even under special observation, as an aspirant who was psychically gifted. He survived. Upon his reawakening, he found no comfort. He and all the others were laid down upon a cold steel table. Incense and chants filled the room. A sacred gene seed, created from the DNA of Sanguinius himself, was brought forward. Kali was cut open. New organs were surgically attached to his growing frame. Chemical stimulants flooded his veins. It would be a pain that tests the very limits of human endurance. Perhaps he was afraid, or excited, or both. What emerged from the process was something, someone new. Kali was dead. What now stood, elevated beyond a mortal man, was Calistarius, of the Blood Angels chapter. He was stronger, faster, his ability to tap into the realm of madness, the warp, had been increased exponentially. Assembled in front of men who had once been figures of myth, who were now his brothers, Calistarius again had his world changed. The Imperium of Man. Humanity was larger than the tribal existence he had known. Over 1 million worlds were home to billions upon billions. Worlds and peoples so vastly different and yet similar. Garden worlds, manufacturing planets, all the way to great hive cities. The information must have been overwhelming. And then came a truth that captured his soul. Sanguinius, the true Sanguinius. The angel who fell from the sky, the one who saved them from the mutant hordes of the wastes, the son of the emperor of mankind. Beauty, nobility, honor, the man with angel wings that soared above the skies of these harsh worlds. Sanguinius had led their people to the stars. They had purged the mutant and Xenos filth that infested the galaxy. A man who gave his life for the Imperium, murdered at the hands of that vile traitor Horus. But most importantly, Sanguinius was hope. A rage against the dying of the light of humanity, the primordial fire of the species the galaxy would always try to snuff out. Sanguinius was the best of them. His blood coursed through Callisterius' veins, and it was his duty to live up to the example and teachings of the great angel. It was a reverence to an ideal that weaved its way into every fibre of the great fortress monasteries and fortifications of the chapter, all the way from the architecture, the statues, the ancient tapestries that spoke of heroes of the bloodline. Callisterius had not known music as a child. The closest that the tribes of Baal Primus came to orchestration were war drums and pyre dirges. It was only when he had passed the trials of the Blood Angels and he had become a son of Sanguinius that young Callisterius had learnt of instruments. To have never even heard music is a fate that we could never imagine. To be a son of Sanguinius was to become a force of nature upon the field of battle, unyielding fury that would crush the enemies of the Imperium. The training was as brutal as the deserts, martial combat, firearms, and for Callisterius, the expansion of his psychic abilities. He was a weapon as a blood angel, but a force of nature as a being connected so intimately to the warp. Like a whetstone to a sword, knowledge was a sharpening for those of the Librarius. They were as much scholars as soldiers. Whispers from the warp often haunted Callisterius, offers of power and grandeur, lies and manipulation he had to fight every day. Something he took under the guidance of Epistolary Gaius Racilus, a stern figure whose stares of disappointment shook even the bravest recruits. For Callisterius and those of the Librarius, it was almost a chapter within a chapter. The Librarian was an order of secrets that even the deeply respected and revered ancient chapter master, hero of the Imperium, Dante, needed permission to enter their most inner sanctums. The Librarian's road was difficult. Their power was a necessary tool that had to be kept in check. Their brother legionaries at any time had to be ready to slaughter them in case they lost control, and their mind melted with the truths not fit for a mortal. Yet to Callisterius, he found friendship, even amongst his non-psychic battle brothers. Gaius Racilus, his mentor, whose friendship something Callisterius earned as the decades began to pass. The apothecary Albinus and his battle brother Quirinus were those who he had considered his closest, his confidants in this never-ending war. Callisterius was liked by his brothers. His zeal, his easy nature, and charisma were a welcome sight amongst the war and the stars. Callisterius over the decades left Baal, as the duty of the Angels of Death was out there in the Imperium, disgusting Xenos, rebelling human colonies, and worst of all, demons fell under the might of Callisterius. Years and years of unending war that tested his abilities, refining them to the experience of a veteran. He had earned a reputation, one that was respected enough to see him requested to aid the glorious elite First Company on the infamous Space Hulk, the Sin of Damnation. Stalking through the damp, claustrophobic conditions of the enormous wreck, Callisterius was brought to the reason he was here for. An ancient blood angel brother, wounded, barely alive, and in a sleep he would never wake from. Callisterius was given the task of delving into his battle brother's mind. Vespario was his name, his survival and story locked underneath a broken mind, clouded by rage and hate, something that began to bleed into Callisterius. But he did not let up. Some truth was locked within, a truth that had Callisterius put his reputation on the line, for as his brothers were itching to retreat, Deeper and deeper into Vespario he delved until he found the truth. Gene stealers. Vespario had locked himself away, surviving long enough to pass on the truth to his brother centuries later. Calistarius, with Vespario's wisdom, led his brothers to an abomination. A gene stealer navigator hybrid, a threat to all of the Imperium. The Lexicanium and First Company annihilated the Xenos filth. A victory at the hands of the bravery of Calistarius. But he was tired. Never before had he used so much of his power. A deep fatigue settled within him. But most frightening of all, Vespario's mind had been warped by a curse known to those of the blood. Calistarius had linked his mind too deeply with one affected by the Black Rage. Baal Secundus, the fortress monastery of the Blood Angels. Black armor emerged from black stone, shadow from shadow. The skull-faced helmet nodded to Calistarius.
Brother Librarian.
Calistarius bowed low.
Reclusiarch?
He was the first outside the tower to address Quirinus with that title. Quirinus didn't answer at first. He stood motionless, and Calistarius felt that his old friend's eyes were on an interior vista. Finally, the Reclusiarch said,
The honor is great, and a great weight.
A pause.
I wonder, can any of us truly be worthy of what we receive?
We are all unworthy of the grace of our Primarch and his great father. We are all flawed. It is our duty to accept that, to strive for the impossible, and to accept the roles that fate and our chapter assign to us in the Eternal Crusade.
Quirinus laughed. It was a good sound, the laughter of a warrior, at one with the truth of his life.
Well spoken, brother. How very ecclesiastical of you. There are times when I think you should be walking this path with me, and not that of a librarian.
No.
Calistarius shook his head.
I am where I must be. Do not mistake my statement of fact for philosophy. Our titles are not honors. They are descriptions of who we are. Reclusiarch is not an address. It is your identity.
Before Armageddon, before Hades' Hive, the Death Company, and the crushing fall of the Ecclesiorium, they were storming an enclave of the Word Bearers. The traitors had established a foothold in Arlesium. Their heresy was a gale blowing over the primary land mass, and reaching out to infect the rest of the system and beyond. The Blood Angels came to purge them, root and branch. The Chaos Space Marines had sized the fortress city of Acastor. Calistarius stood beside Quirinus in the doorway to the Thunderhawk's cockpit. They stared ahead at the approaching outer defenses. Anti-aircraft fire sought them out. The gunship pilots flew through the barrage with deft confidence.
A worthy battle lies before us.
The Reclusiarch said. The Librarian nodded. The line was something of a ritual between them, an echo of their first engagement as scouts. Many worlds and decades ago, Calistarius' response should have been, "May we always be so blessed." Instead, he said,
Horus will rue this day.
Speaking words 10,000 years out of place, his tone was furious but hollow, as if his voice was not truly his. Quirinus gave him a sharp look.
Brother Calistarius.
He blinked.
May we always be so blessed.
He said he would not remember until later his other words. He would not remember until later how his mind had slipped in time. Now he noticed Quirinus' gaze.
Is something wrong?
I hope not.
The sky was black with smoke. Smoke from burning vehicles, ruined buildings, high explosives, flesh. It had been necessary to raise Acastor. The Word Bearers had done more than occupy the fortress. They had made its population their own. There had been nothing to save, and everything to destroy. The Blood Angels had visited the judgment of the Emperor upon the heretic and the traitor. Perhaps elsewhere, on Elysium, there would be those who had not turned their faces away from the Emperor's light. But not here. Icasta and all within its walls had been put to the sword. The fortress itself had been shattered. Not a single wall still stood. On its plateau was now a field of rubble, from where Calistarius sat upon a pile of rockcrete. The landscape of heaped and shattered grey stretched for kilometers in every direction. Here and there, an arm emerged from the wreckage. Some hands were limp, others were splayed in perpetual pleading. Beneath the remains of the fortress were thousands of lost souls.
You seem pensive,
Quirinus said. The Reclusiarch strode towards him over the wreckage, like the triumph of faith itself.
The mutations were severe.
You mean there were many psychers?
Calistarius nodded.
You have fought many such contingents before.
But one so large.
You were tested.
Quirinus observed.
I was.
He was exhausted. He had been forced to discover the limits of his power by slamming up against them repeatedly. Quirinus removed his helmet.
The smell of burning heretic is strong,
he said, apparently changing the subject.
Better that than the stench of living heretic.
Quirinus laughed.
Well said, brother.
He looked off at the smoke-blurred horizon.
Now tell me what is troubling you.
Calistarius smiled.
Do you never tire of being my confessor?
If I did, I could not admit to it.
Quirinus turned back to the librarian.
Out with it.
The heresy took root here so quickly, and it spread so quickly too. This world was a loyal one only a few years ago. I do not understand how a people can fall from faith with such ease.
That is the essence of temptation. Ease is what lies at the core of heresy. Chaos seems to demand nothing and give much. If one is weak, such a combination is impossible to resist. Faith, brother librarian, true faith, is difficult. It demands everything.
His voice suddenly took on a sharp, probing edge.
Has the warp been speaking to you?
No more than usual. Whispers, promises of infinite power, visions of becoming the ultimate defender of the Imperium.
And then its ruler.
Precisely. Have no fear, Reclusiarch.
There was still a novelty to using that title.
I know these lies for what they are. They have no appeal for me.
Perhaps not now. But if there is no temptation, then you have yet to be truly tested. The day may come when such power will seem necessary and justified.
Quirinus paused.
During the battle, the thirst and the rage, you were able to keep them in check?
Yes.
The turn of the conversation made Calistarius uneasy. He thought again of that moment on the Thunderhawk during the approach to Icastor, when two different time periods had overlapped in his consciousness.
I am not slipping away,
he reassured his old friend.
See that you don't,
Quirinus replied, with more command than confidence.
The struggle against the Black Rage is difficult, and will always grow more difficult. Remember your faith, and remember its nature. The struggle is eternal. Beware of ease, and know that its presence is always a lie.
The Black Rage, the flaw, the crack, underneath the noble, beautiful visage that was the sons of Sanguinius. The gene seed had changed Calistarius. Where once was the homely features of a Baalite tribal, he had been elevated. He was beautiful, changed into the likeness of Sanguinius himself. But there was a darkness in the blood, a wound that had been birthed over 10,000 years ago, something that all the scions of Sanguinius suffered. It began with the visions. Flashes of memory appeared within the sufferer's mind. They saw Sanguinius through their Primarch's eyes aboard the vengeful spirit. Images of the corrupted traitor, the infamous War Master Horus, engaged in a duel against the brother that he had once loved the most. Then came the rage, the soul-haunting, hot fury that had come from a heart that had once loved, that had been betrayed so deeply it would burn the world. A battle brother taken by the black rage was a raving berserker. His throat-tearing screams that bellowed out damnation to Horus was all that was left. An honourable death in combat was all that remained for these once noble men, lost to the madness. And yet this was not the only burden they carried. The red thirst, blood, that sweet crimson, awakened terrible lust within them. Their canines elongated at the prospect of the warm meal. They were gifts and curses, a path that each and every son of Sanguinius resisted. It was a burden the chapters kept secret, for what would the Imperium think of their noble defenders if they saw the darkness that lay in their hearts, in their very gene code? There were ways to fight it. Callisterius had been shown them. The pursuit of music, art, and craftsmanship was encouraged to all battle brothers. Some Astartes trained, some studied philosophy, but Callisterius and all the sons of Sanguinius created beauty. It was a calming of the soul, a light of hope against the darkness of the rage. Do not go gentle into that good night. Callisterius had to resist it, lest his very being be erased by hate. Upon the sin of damnation, Callisterius had delved into Brother Vespario's mind. It was a broken thing, stung by the effects of the black rage, and its taint was not something Callisterius could wash away. Reclusia Quirinus, Callisterius' friend and battle brother, had noticed the change. He had been there the day Quirinus was blessed, elevated to a chaplain, a reclusiarch. Something that had brought joy to both of them, as they supported each other in the burdens they carried. War and death was a life that they both knew, as for decades they fought across the Imperium, turning from aspirants to battle brothers, and then veterans, living the length of multiple lifetimes in the service of the Emperor and the Blood Angels. And then he heard it. Horus will rue this day. Callisterius did not know where the words came from. Quirinus' concern grew as he began to see conflict after conflict. The once outgoing, charismatic Callisterius begin to retreat within his own thoughts. The cloud of rage was casting its shadow. Even Albinus and Gaius Racelus could see it. And then, Reclusia Quirinus, the zealous friend, whose banter kept him tied to his humanity, was lost, his ship disappearing from the light of the Imperium. Dead or lost, they did not know. An ember inside Callisterius' soul grew into a flame, the visions of the Horus heresy taking over more of his perception. They are my space marines, and they shall know no fear. The litany of the Emperor that was tested as Callisterius was losing himself. Some of us fear injury, all fear death, but most terrifying of all is to lose our memories, our sense of who we are. The wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had fought no lightning. They do not go gentle into that good night. He had fought it for centuries, rising through the ranks all the way to epistolary, wielding his mighty ancient four-sword Vitaris. But even with the strength of angels, Callisterius fell. All their gifts, a curse delayed. A raving, mad thing was all that was left. Gone was the cobalt blue of the librarians, replaced by the black of rage in the infamous markings of the Death Company. Crosses marked in crimson decorated his armour. to emulate the wounds their gene father had taken from Horus. It was the only adornment he had left. Led by specialized Death Company chaplains, Callisterius and his fallen brothers were corralled onto battlefields across the Imperium, sent into the most brutal war zones. The Death Company were loosed upon the enemies of the Imperium, their chaplains doing their best, with the ancient litany chants, to keep them focused on their enemies instead of each other. Whatever was left of the once beloved Callisterius was swallowed. He was somewhere deep within his mind, but drowned by the black rage. Be it anger, pain, or a depressive state, many of us know the deep, deep fog that can smother the mind, a hell that feels impossible to crawl out from. Callisterius, on the world of Armageddon, found himself thrown against an orc tide. The Greenskins were a savage species, whose only directive was violence and war. Callisterius wreaked a bloody toll upon them. His plasma pistol overheated, his sword wet with alien blood, and his psychic attacks mixed with the vitriol of the black rage fuel. The battles had been endless, until finally Callisterius and the surviving Death Company joined the final assault upon the Ecclesiorium in the enormous Hades Hive city. It was akin to death itself, the vision of a warrior clad in midnight black, with a face once beautiful, contorted with hate, the heat of rage and fire around him, wreathing orcs with every swing. Every part of his armor was dented and cut. His wounds poured blood, but still he fought, on and on, until the Ecclesiorium building collapsed. Callisterius and the orcs were crushed underneath a mountain of rubble, but still he lived, immobile, in the dark, alone with his rage. The days passed, as what little spark of Callisterius remained battled the black rage. He began to transform. The once cloud of the black rage began to change within. A metamorphosis had begun. For several days and nights, this scion of Sanguinius fought against the curse, handful by handful. Inch by inch he began to climb, and like a man emerging from the allegorical cave, looking into the light, his eyes adjusted. Someone new emerged from the rubble. The black rage had been conquered, but Callisterius had not survived. The creature, this man, was Mephiston.
Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight, and learn, too late they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death, who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light.
An angel rose, surrounded by fire and rubble. He was dead, but reborn, ancient but new. Immediately he was set upon by the Greenskins, but they were cut down in an instant. It was dispassionate. The rage was gone. It was outside of him, a fuel rather than a sickness. This new being wanted to return to his brothers, but the curiosity to test this new form won out. He flung himself at the Xenos. Columns of brilliant lightning and ferocious fire ripped through their horde, drowning out their bellows. Psychic wings sprouted from his back, began to soar above Hades' hive, until a voice entered his mind. No, stop. Mephiston tapped into the pool of rage and drove down towards the source, a figure who dared to enter his mind. He struck out, knocking down his enemy, only to hear a voice call out, "Callisterius." It was Racilus, his friend, his mentor, shielding himself, lying against a winged shrine with a halo of thorns. Before this ancient librarian stood a figure in ruined black armor, covered in viscera. His once handsome features had been replaced by a pale, ghoulish visage. His aura, his power was enormous, like standing next to an inferno. This thing made Racilus's skin crawl. It was Callisterius, but the man answered him back that Callisterius is dead. It was clear to Racilus's eyes and his psychic probing that there was truth to those words. He asked him then, "Who are you?" A name was burned across his soul, an identity, a path that brought him back. It was a guiding light. It was Mephiston. Racilus looked deeper within this Mephiston. The last he had seen of him was Callisterius, lost to the black rage, but this Mephiston was calm and sane. He had come back from the black rage, the first to do so in Blood Angel's history. Racilus told him that Callisterius was not dead. He could see him within. He saw this new power, and he saw the curse of the chapter gone. Whatever this power is, it must be tethered, tied to something human. You must remember yourself. Placing his hand upon his once mentor's shoulder, Mephiston promised he would. The Lord of Death, Mephiston, had been born inside the rubble of Hades' hive. He was someone new. He had Callisterius' memories, but they did not feel like his own. Like he was an outsider who had watched every moment of Callisterius' life. Returning to the chapter's homeworld of Baal, Mephiston was met with superstition. No one, not a single soul had ever come back from the Black Rage. Examined by Astorath the Grim, the High Chaplain of the Blood Angels, the man tasked with eliminating those who had fallen too deep to the Black Rage, he let Mephiston live. Mephiston was not lost to the Black Rage. He had conquered it. For a moment that should have been a sign of hope, it was met with caution. This Mephiston was changed. He looked ghoulish. His presence was unnerving. Even his accent had changed to an older form of Imperial Gothic. Even his friends Racilus and the sanguinary priest Albinus saw that this Mephiston was different. He was cold, calculating, intelligent. All humours and warmth had died within him, so unlike the charismatic Callisterius they once knew. But the power was undeniable. He had raged against the dying of the light, and Callisterius had not gone gentle into that good night. He had become Mephiston. Wherever the Lord of Death strode, the enemies of the Imperium cowered. His psychic powers were elevated to such a level. He was worth a dozen of his librarian battle brothers. On black, psychic wing, with veins of blood, Mephiston flew over the battlefields of numerous worlds, eliminating entire forces, challenging the vilest of foes alone, unassisted. He had become the strongest psyker within the Adeptus Astartes, and so when the time came, after decades, he was unchallenged when he assumed the role of Chief Librarian of the Blood Angels chapter. Mephiston was powerful, but he did not understand it. Even as he searched for the truth of his transformation, as a member of the Librarius, he was as much a scholar as a warrior, but he found no answers, only trouble. Where power lies, others crave it, and none so much as the forces of chaos. A mere few decades into the birth of Mephiston, the demon Prince Makar trapped him inside the crystal caves of Solon V. The vile creature of the warp weaved its venomous promises: power, elevation, immortality, demonhood, claiming that Mephiston was already firmly on the path. Perhaps he was not saved from the Black Rage, but corrupted by it. He was not Calistarius, but Mephiston's twin heart still beat for Sanguinius and the Emperor. He lunged at the demon prince and throttled the life out of it. With the strength of an angel, he banished it back to the warp. Mephiston was loyal. He was a new man, a new soul. Even if he did not understand his power, or why he had earned it, it was still for the Imperium. But as the decades passed, more and more of the chapter only knew Mephiston. Calistarius was a distant memory, known only to a handful. A sentiment dragged up as a near half a century after the Battle of Hades' Hive, the Lord of Death came into contact with the harrowing faith. Lost after the Second Battle of Armageddon, the damaged Blood Angel vessel was boarded, slaying the cursed sons of Lorgar. Mephiston and the Blood Angels pushed further and further into the vessel until they saw him. A figure donned in black, with that uncomfortable bone-white skull helm. A chaplain, a reclusiarch, a man the chapter thought lost, Quirinus. The tension was immediate. What stood before Quirinus was Calistarius, but yet he was not. Calistarius is dead, Mephiston told him. But what drew the most ire was the revelation of Mephiston's conquering of the Black Rage. It soured what should have been this joyous reunion of friends. The zealous priest inside Quirinus overpowered any sense of friendship. The thought of one losing the Black Rage was abominable. It felt heretical. He even voiced it. But no rise came from Mephiston. Quirinus was Calistarius' friend, not his, and the unnerving, cold intelligence radiating from him made that clear to the Reclusiarch. United again, the Blood Angels' host followed the trail that Quirinus had been set on decades ago, crushing and bloodying the scattered word-bearers' resistance they met. Constantly those judgmental eyes were upon Mephiston, though now he had begun to question if this was the same superstition all his brothers had in the beginning. Or was it a madness accumulated from being adrift in the warp for so long? Perhaps Quirinus had not fully survived as himself. Finding themselves upon a strange world, the Angels' host finally approached a temple, surrounded by statues of long-dead Astartes, frozen in battle. As they flung open the gates, Quirinus and the others wept. An artifact, a painting of their magnanimous Lord Sanguinius. To gaze upon it, you would be breathless, tears staining your cheeks as you witnessed true beauty. All except Mephiston. His hearts were moved, but something felt off. Quirinus, with venom and rage, decried Mephiston in front of all of them, magnifying the distrust they always felt around him. The loneliness, the isolation, the betrayal of a friend did nothing, for he was Mephiston, and Calistarius was dead. Mephiston had been right, as the Blood Angels found themselves ambushed. Their actions in the temple fed a demonic ritual, one that birthed a monster, Doombreed. The demon prince of Khorne tore his way onto the battlefield, an abominable creature battling Mephiston in a duel that scarred everything it touched. With rubble and lava around them, Mephiston rejected the demon's temptations and slew the vile creature and the false artifact of Sanguinius. But it came at a cost. Quirinus, his once friend, fell to the Black Rage. With his last hateful words he told the Lord of Death, "I will not return. I will lose too much. I will not be a monster." He wouldn't fight it. He rejected the path Mephiston took. He wouldn't become something devoid of the righteous rage of Sanguinius. he wouldn't become a monster. Antros and Racelus sat in silence, watching the slumped figure of their chief librarian. The only sound came from the blood rain, splashing crimson stars across the dazzling floor. Antros was about to speak when a torrent of images flooded his mind. He saw Hades' hive again, but this time he was pinned beneath a huge weight, unable to move, despite an incredible fury pounding through his veins. It was agony, but Antros sensed that now he was seeing the truth.
It is always the same, always different,
said Mephiston in his head. Antros looked over at the chief librarian, but still he was insensate.
Always Armageddon. But each time I try to discover the meaning of my power, changing the details, searching for the truth of my birth, the truth of my nature.
I do not understand,
said Antros.
Yes, you do, Lexiconium. We have nobility in our blood. Such nobility. The blood of the angel, divinity, filling our hearts, swelling our veins. Our father was the Emperor's purest son, and we carry his bloodline still. I know you feel it, Lexiconium. The faith and the fury, the honor and the hunger burning within you, as it does in all of the angel's sons.
The dome's walls parted to reveal a wall of blood-filled eyes, dozens of them, all staring at him.
Apart from me, of course, I have escaped the curse. The tales are true. However furious the fight, the usual hunger does not haunt me. My heart no longer pounds with those terrible lusts. I have escaped the doom of our chapter. I am unfettered, free to finally prove our nobility. I have the power to avert the grim fate that hangs over us. This slow, gnawing decline, this gradual death.
The eyes closed, and the walls became a featureless white once more. As the grotesque images vanished, the scenes of destruction filled Antros's mind again, showing him the ruins of Hades' hive.
Yet I return here, faithful as the tide, endlessly rewriting the moment of my death birth. You see, I have escaped one curse, only to discover another, far crueler torment. What you saw on Thermia is an echo of that first slaughter on Hades' hive. But instead of fading, the echo grows louder with every repeat. Every time I give vent to my power, it becomes wilder, more dangerous, more unstoppable. At first, I can use it as a weapon, but the weapon becomes the wielder. And when I am myself again, I recall nothing of the excess that has driven me to. All I know is the carnage I have wrought.
There was a clatter of ceramite as Mephiston sat up in his chair. His face was freckled with blood spots, and his hair was plastered across his clammy skin.
But I have to control it, Lexiconium. If I can find an anchor for the power that is growing in me, I will be the living embodiment of what a blood angel can be. I will be proof that we can finally escape this curse. Do you understand? If I can master this gift, I can save us. There is no power in the warp equal to the strength that has been given to me. It is like none of the disciplines we strive to master through learning. It is not practiced. It is not studied. It is wild, glorious. It is the blood of Sanguinius, unbound. It is the power of
His words faltered, and then he looked at the blood-spattered floor.
I am so close to fulfilling the destiny that the angel was robbed of. But if I cannot harness this, if I cannot control this power, if it keeps growing in fury and I find no leash,
He shook his head, and his voice was full of pain.
then it would be better that I died as Calistarius under those rocks, rather than save us. I will be the final death knell for the sons of the angel.
Mephiston fell silent, and after a while Raceless spoke up. He saw the surprise in Antros's face, and as usual, sardonic tone was absent.
For decades I have watched over the chief librarian in this hidden chamber, witnessing his agony as he pushes himself again and again to the edge of destruction, attempting to divine the key to this gift.
He rose from his chair and crossed the room, covering the floor with a new explosion of bloody sigils.
But we have failed every time.
As Raceless reached the wall of the sphere, a brass plinth, as high as his waist, materialized from the dazzling whiteness. On top of the elegant, beautiful, filigreed plinth was a book, a thick, leather-bound ledger, locked shut with a metal clasp. Its cover bore no title, but it was embossed with a winged blood drop, picked out in gold leaf. Next to the book was a quill and an inkstand.
I record everything, every word and deed that drives the chief librarian to the brink, and at the moment I feel him straining at the bonds of sanity.
He nodded to the bloody syringe lying on the floor.
I bring him back.
Then you do have control,
said Antros, looking at the empty syringe. Mephiston shook his head.
Each time, it is harder to hear Gaius call.
He leaned forward in his chair, his eyes shifting colour to match the sapphire gleam in Raceless's eyes.
If I gave vent to all the power I have within me, there is nothing that could bring me back. So I chain myself like a dog, always holding myself back.
He began pacing around the chamber.
But this power comes from the angel. To deny it is impossible and wrong. I must find a way to unleash his full might. I have held it at bay so long that it is starting to devour me from within.
He stopped and faced Antros, his eyes burning, his mask of serenity forgotten.
Why would the angels show me such a great destiny, but deny me the means to embrace it? What is this trial he has set me? Ultimate power within my grasp.
He clawed at the air, causing it to ripple and boil.
And I cannot use it.
He stopped pacing and stared into the middle distance, his eyes full of hope.
But now I see a chance. I have heard the same summons that haunts Zin. Someone is calling me to Divinus Prime. Something is waiting for me there. Something that will give me the answer. Something Zin thinks I am blind to. But until now, I could not give it a name.
I do not know what lives within me. I do not know how this hunger might grow. This I know. I hold darkness in my hands. It is mine, and this is my vow. It is and shall always be the darkness of holy extermination. For the glory of the Blood Angels, for the Emperor, for Sanguinius.
The Lord of Death, a psyker of unrivaled power within the Adeptus Astartes. Yet after nearly a century of war, he was no closer to understanding his power. It was something feared, a path that had cost him the Black Rage, something viewed as the righteous fury of Sanguinius, their Gene Father, their great angel. His once friend Quirinus let himself fall to the rage, unwilling to fight it, unwilling to become what Mephiston was. But to Mephiston, even if he did not understand his power, he knew in his heart that it was righteous. It was born of Sanguinius. It had to be. The duties of the Chief Librarian continued. Counselor on the Etheric to Chapter Master Dante, and the greatest weapon within the Blood Angels chapter. The decades had passed, to a time in the late 41st millennium. Mephiston was a figure respected, feared, and for some, revered. New blood had replenished the ranks of the chapter, ones who only knew the stories of the Lord of Death. Lexicanium Lucius Antros, a young ambitious librarian, saw divinity where others saw a monster, an outlook put to the test upon the world of Thermia. The planet was falling. The foul Xenos, the Sepulchrali, had ravaged the civilization until the surrender and evacuation had been ordered. Antros and the Blood Angels assisted the Imperial efforts to rescue the civilian population from this parasitic-like race that devoured and multiplied from their victims into a rolling, unstoppable tide. The Sepulchrali were rushing Antros, preparing to wipe him out and his exhausted mortal defenders, until, like a blazing comet, Mephiston rocketed into them with a visage like a corpse, cold, emotionless, and shadowed. The Lord of Death began the slaughter. With just a wave of his hands, dozens of Xenos were burst apart. To witness Mephiston fight was like beholding the fury of a god. The unnerving, spine-tingling feeling when you are reminded of how fragile you really are. Mephiston felt nothing besides a zen state, which contrasted so much from his passionate brothers. Antros followed deeper into the Xenos' territory, seeking to find a temple that had been plaguing many of his psychic visions. Accompanied by one brave Imperial soldier, the Lexicanium found himself ambushed by a horde of Sepulchrali. Again, the Lord of Death crashed in, reaping a toll that honoured his namesake, but their numbers kept on increasing. Finally, Antros saw emotion ripple across Mephiston's face, turning from a furrowed brow into a snarl. Mephiston began to draw from the energy within him. He saw the Black Rage, like an outsider watching from afar. He directed it, unleashing it at his enemies, but never feeling its venomous touch. But the power kept escalating. Oily black flames started to drip from Mephiston. Flames and raw psychic power bloomed from him in a tornado of death. In an instant, the Sepulchrali were ash. Antros turned to his chief librarian, seeing a feral face staring back, glowing crimson eyes with razor-sharp canines, looking hungrily at the Imperials. Mephiston, in this stupor, caused the death of the mortal soldier, only brought back to sanity by the cries of Antros. Death's pallor returned to his face. Mephiston, in a look of alarm or shame, asked Antros to tell no one of what he saw, and strode off. Returning to Baal and the homeworlds, Antros was brought before the chief librarian and his own mentor Gaius Racilis, into the innermost sanctums of the chapter, in halls decked with artifacts, sculptures and pieces of art, priceless and ancient. Mephiston, against the advice of his friend Racilis, brought Lucius Antros into the fold. The tales are true. However furious the fight, the usual hunger does not haunt me. My heart no longer pounds with those terrible lusts. I have escaped the doom of our chapter. I am unfettered, free to finally prove our nobility. I have the power to avert the grim fate that hangs over us. Mephiston's power was hope. This I know. I hold darkness in my hands. It is mine, and this is my vow. It is, and always shall be, the darkness of holy extermination. But this hope, this power, was growing. It is the blood of Sanguinius, unbound, but he was losing himself to it. He had to control it, because if he could, then a path of salvation was open to his brothers. He was not Callisterius, but Mephiston was a man, and he cared for his brothers, his chapter. Black flames weaved its way across his arms and chest, the power leaking out of him, putting him in great pain. Each time he utilized his gift, he found it harder and harder to control. Only Racilis, with their bond, could bring him back, but it was getting harder, something that deeply worried his ancient librarian friend. But hope had come. Something had linked Antros and his chief librarian, a link that had led to a path of hope. The blade, Perific, an artifact that could help Mephiston control his growing power. It was an opportunity they had to take. Divinus Prime, a world firm in the grip of the zealous imperial ecclesiarchy, had been lost, shrouded by the warp. Mephiston, Racilis, Antros, and a squad of blood angels, alongside the ecclesiarchal priest Zin, travelled to Divinus Prime, using the connection to a divinite priest the Lord of Death had ripped through the warp, an action that had put Baal in danger, as demons of Nurgle had attempted and failed to follow him through. Vitaris, Mephiston's force sword blazed with vermilion fire, as the group were ripped into the warp, cast upon its tides until they landed upon Divinus Prime itself, a feat only Mephiston was capable of. The group emerged onto the planet, feeling nauseous and with spikes of pain all over their bodies. But what was more shocking was the world itself. Enormous spires and fields of bone jutted from almost every surface, all shapes and sizes, from all manner of creatures. The bones were piled up and stacked, some even looked like trees from their interlocking vines. The group had looked to the sky and saw a menagerie of strange colours. They were isolated. Their connection to the warp felt dulled, but yet Mephiston still suffered. The black flames under his armour still burning. The group pressed on, finding a world at war. Miles upon miles of crucified priests, and religious civil war was ravaging the holy world of Divinus Prime, aflame with the zeal of a new, strange cult. Approaching the city of Mormotha, one of the last bastions against the forces of this new brewing cult, Mephiston needed answers and directions towards the blade Perific. Even with this uneasy feeling Racilis and Antros were experiencing, Mephiston was nearly unfettered, his psychic mind touching another who he had known long ago. Father Orsuf, the crippled ancient veteran's remaining eye lit up, and with a grin going from ear to ear, he greeted the Lord of Death. To the surprise of Antros, Mephiston smiled too, telling his old companion that he had heard a malicious rumour that he had retired. With great effort, Father Orsuf managed a salute and told him that he kept his chainsword oiled and ready. Mephiston grabbed the shoulder of his old mortal friend. Warmth emanated from him as he told him that he had earned his rest, but he had come for his mind. Mormotha and Divinus Prime had answers, and they would be his. Fire and warp madness rippled all around Mephiston as the Blood Angels found themselves within a trap. The clues given to them by Father Orsif had led them to the enormous cathedral inside Mormotha. Using an underground network of tunnels, Mephiston, Racelus, and Antros made their way towards the cathedral until Mephiston fell down along the claustrophobic damp path. His power, Lycon Thermia, began to overwhelm him. The black flames ran rampant. Pain thrummed through him as he fought back the psychic torrent within. Calistarius commanded Racelus, the concern evident on all of their faces. Again, the power was escalating. Time was running short for Mephiston as he strained to bring himself back to center. The cathedral was host to a ravenous, zealous crowd as the return of a prophet was taking place. Cheers roared all throughout as they held up charms in the shape similar to the desired blade Perific. It was in a moment that this joyous occasion turned to a stomach-churning, migraine-filled sickness as the speaker began to transform, contorting, exploding into a vile demon. Mephiston roared down to strike at the creature as the crowd of once innocent, faithful servants of the Emperor exploded in a torrent of mist, themselves mutated into warp-spawned creatures. Racelus, Antros, and the other Blood Angels were almost overwhelmed, having to resort to their bare hands as their weapons were clogged with meat. Mephiston himself was struggling, matching the demon blow for blow, but seemingly holding back, restrained by the worry of his power going out of control. The Blood Angels were moments away from the sheer number of bodies pushing over them, free to run amok inside the city, until Mephiston unveiled his plan. He signaled his tech marine to release the gates placed high upon the walls. Black, viscous oil poured in. If Mephiston couldn't use his power, then he would use his mind. The talks with his old friend, Father Orsif, had been fruitful. He had learned more than just the tunnels. Turning the city's own architecture against their enemies, the black sludge was ignited. Fire and warp madness rippled all around Mephiston as their enemies burned. The demon's ritual, the abominable cult's plan, failed. The city had been saved by the skin of its teeth and the genius of Mephiston, though it was born perhaps of his own fear of himself, fear of losing control. Though it was a victory, the group had no time to rest on their laurels. Finally putting the missing pieces together for the location of the blade Perific. To the mountains, Mephiston and his companions rushed as the forces of the abominable cult raced in parallel. Soaring through the air on an old storm bird, they enjoyed the calm before the storm, as it seemed that war had reached the temple where the blade Perific was held. As the Blood Angels arrived, they descended down onto the battlements, finding the guardians of the temple to be Imperial Sisters of Battle, already knee-deep in mutants and demons. Mephiston, Racelus, and Antros aided their allies in cleaning up the field until Mephiston's glowing sword Vitaris was slick with traitor blood. The battle began to die down until a strange figure stepped forward. His visage was that of a beautiful warrior, one whose very presence made mortals weep. Zorambus, one whose truth was not hidden to Mephiston. The armies of the cult had failed, smashed against the Imperium's might, and found wanting. This Zorambus began to taunt them, unleashing his vitriol and rage, his failure to his master at the hands of this vile Lord of Death, he began to sow confusion in their ranks, all to buy time. The strange menagerie of colours that had haunted their journey began to convulse and distort. The ritual succeeded, and the sky began to fall. Mephiston sprung his psychic black wings and dashed towards this sorcerer, easily overwhelming him. But the corrupted thing, Zorambus, released his manipulative form, dashing straight for Mephiston's mentor and friend, Gaius Racilus. The corrupted figure poured himself into the veteran librarian, taking control and attacking Mephiston. The oily black flames ignited. Mephiston felt the power overwhelm him. He unleashed it all upon this possessed Racilus, his closest friend in the universe. How dare this monster touch him? His eyes began to glow. Blood poured down his cheek like tears, and cracks of dark flame weaved over his body. Vitaros ignited in a scalding flame. The gift had consumed him. The mountain shook. Vortexes of flame spilled out, illuminating the night in the energy of the warp and the hate born from a demigod. Antros rushed to the spire, hoping desperately to find the blade Purific, only to find that he was not alone. Others, mortals in the service of the foul gods, had beaten him to it. The Lord of Death and the possessed Racilus crashed near them, with Mephiston finally able to free his friend and destroying the corrupted sorcerer. His face looked like cracked glass, with veins of black all over. Fire and sorcery were spilling forth from Mephiston, uncontrolled, until the wounded Racilus plunged a vial of blood into his friend. Control returns to Mephiston. His surrounding in ruins and his allies wounded, he staggered up towards the blade Purific. Then he caught sight of them, the chaos-aligned mortals. But to the shock of Antros, his lord did not intervene. He let them escape. Divinus Prime was at peace. Chaos was beaten, but anger flushed through Antros. He dared to think. Perhaps his cold, outcast of a lord had betrayed the Imperium. If I can find an anchor for the power that is growing in me, I will be the living embodiment of what a blood angel can be. I will be proof that we can finally escape the curse. This power, it is the blood of Sanguinius unbound. Fate had brought them to Divinus Prime, but these events had been architected. A great game, a race for the blade Purific, but that very architect had slipped up. Mephiston had caught the scent. He let the blade Purific go, attaching a psychic link to it, one they could follow. But with the blade gone, so did the chance to help control his power. But perhaps he was not meant to control it. Perhaps he was meant to bear it until it consumed him. It was the blood of Sanguinius, unbound. What right did he have to shackle it? The duty was accepted. The burden would be his. If the power he held was growing, then so would his control and discipline in wielding it. There was no other choice. The future of his chapter and his brothers and his Imperium depended upon it. The return to Baal in the wake of this Pyrrhic victory was a somber one. Much blood stained Mephiston's hands, but a sense of hope, a steeling of his nerve, was revitalized, seeing in himself the strength to endure this gift. A handful of years passed upon Baal for Mephiston, a time of study, inside the chemic meditation spheres of Baal. The veteran librarian let his mind drift upon the tides of the warp, until visions of doom poured into his mind. Images of burning planets, and the enemies of the Imperium rising, and enemies approaching. He awoke in need of answers. travelling miles upon miles of tunnels. Inside Baal's most ancient prison, he arrived at a cell, locked under mechanisms and wards so powerful none could ever break it. The Octo Calivarii, the six-limbed, multi-ribbed, gaunt Xenos, lay inside. An immortal, a psycho corrupted by chaos. Its presence made even Mephiston's skin crawl. Here it lay, imprisoned for millennia for the crimes of enslavement and genocide. Mephiston had come for answers, and so he took them. Delving into its mind, he sought out the visions and prophecies hidden within. The connection peered into the realm of chaos. Amidst fire and blood, he saw him. The demon prince, the bloodthirster of Khorne, Kabanda. Combined with the news from chapter master Dante, two threats were preparing to lay siege to Baal. The Tyrannid High Fleet Leviathan and the forces of Khorne. It was the doom of the chapter. It would be a threat that would require all scions of Sanguinius.
Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. Because if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you.
At the center of it all stood Mephiston. He took no blood, but drank in the potency of the sharing nonetheless. He seems to swell in size, becoming dark in countenance, shadows gathering around his back like flexing wings.
Brothers,
he said, and his voice was in their ears and in their minds, thick with stolen life.
lend me your arts.
The ruby light flared, becoming not brighter but more intense, taking on the consistency beyond that which light should possess. Mephiston's form wavered and grew. He was speaking words no servant of the Emperor should ever utter. A wound appeared before him, a slice in reality that dripped blood and tore like rent flesh. It split wide, and its edge bled fire and vitae. Through it Raceless saw terrible things. 2 armies of demons, one black, one red, battled upon a plain of bone. A gate of scarlet light in the shape of an angel opened from the demon's world into his own. There were stars on his side, and the curve of a red world, with 2 moons encircling by warring fleets. Baal. He was looking at Baal. A titanic monstrosity was only yards from the gate, ape-faced and wide-horned. Blood-red skin stained with every swing of its axe, as it fought its way through the last beings barring its way. Hideous foes, almost as mighty as the creature, fell before its blade. From the demon emanated a terrible, all-encompassing fury that resounded from Mephiston's soul like the striking of a bell calling him to an eternity of war. Mephiston had opened a way into the realm of the Blood God. Heresy of the First Order. Worse by far, it spoke of a dark power in the Chief Librarian that exceeded that of all those who had come before him. Mephiston drew hard on the other librarians. Raceless winced at the pain. The vital brotherhood between the psychos strained like a bulging net. Instinctively, Raceless knew the bonds joining them was all that prevented them from falling head first into the no places of the warp. The view changed, sweeping down over the battlefield. Mephiston sprouted wings, blood red and huge, traces of fine veins visible through the stretched skin. His body was black as night, and eyes aglow. The view through the rip in space and time halted in the maw of the gates as the demon slew its last opponent. Kabanda roared at the sky and his followers screamed out their praises of him, and fell in a frenzy on the last of the black-skinned demons, putting them to the sword and finally breaking them. Triumphantly, the Angel's Bane stepped towards the gate, ready to fall upon Baal. The Lord of Fury stopped. His triumph turned to puzzlement. He reached his hands to the gate to find his way barred. Snorting mists of blood from his nostrils, he peered downwards and there spied Mephiston. He grunted a laugh, his angry face twisting with mirth. Heavy dreadlocks bound in brass rattled upon his breastplate. Yellow eyes shone with fiery delight.
What is this? Little angel, stop the gate. I have won the right to pass this way by blood and might. Begone. We shall see each other soon enough. I shall call for you, and you will join me.
Back!
Spoke Mephiston. The space between he and the demon shimmered with heat.
You cannot pass. The sons of the great angel do not permit it.
Kabanda snorted again.
You have no business here, Callisterius,
he said mockingly.
Then how am I here?
Shouted Mephiston back.
We abjure you. Depart from this gate by the will of the great angel.
By way of answer, the demon threw back his head and howled with rage, so the ground shook and the sky rumbled with an answering thunder.
Your broken-winged lord has no power over me. I am coming for your head, little Callisterius,
he said, pointing his coiled whip at Mephiston.
Baal shall fall. The angels will see their true nature, and Khorne shall rejoice. Your legion is gathered after all this time. Such a fine harvest of warriors for the blood god.
He looked through the rift and spied the others in the cave.
All of you will fall to your knees and gladly follow me before the 8th day of my manifestation is out.
Kabanda's yellow eye passed over Racilis. His soul shivered. The demon's gaze provoked the rage in him. His mouth thirsted for blood, his soul for battle, and in his mind's eye, unwelcome flashes of war, fraught millennia before, rose up to trouble him. His comrades were not so aged as he. Racilis was steeped in the warp. Centuries of experience gave him a wisdom and resilience the others could not claim. The web binding the coven shuddered under Kabanda's regard. Several of the company screamed with rage, but none fell. All stood firm.
My kind have resisted your temptation since the dawn of the Imperium. You will not best us. Be gone from here. This is not your time.
I will pass.
Turn back.
Kabanda laughed in a savage, brutal mirth.
Then let the harvest be of blood rather than warriors. You may die rather than serve easily enough. Blood is its own reward. Khorne cares not whence it flows, only that it flows.
The beast swung his axe at Mephiston. Psychic energy blasted out where blade met man. Skulls, dislodged by the shockwave from the ground of Khorne's realm, flew in every direction and rang hollow, musical notes as they rained down upon the sand and bone of the false earth. Within the cavern, the impact shivered out from Mephiston. Bonds until now invisible flared brightly, joining the breast of each librarian to his fellows, with crackling arcs of power. Immaterial energies and the force of the blow together dissipated into the crystals, making the rock formations sing. The mountain shook. The air shimmered with volcanic heat, and flaming cinders burst from the psychic web. But Mephiston did not fall. Kabanda roared in outrage, and cast his beady eye over the assembled librarians.
He who renounces his loyalty to the dead emperor shall be rewarded with immortal life, so swear I, most beloved of Khorne,
said Kabanda. No one replied, but Racilis felt, through the heat and rage, faint wavering.
Do you see, little Calistarius? They are tempted.
The last word became a grunt, and he hewed with his axe again at Mephiston. Warp-made iron clashed with the dark radiance of Mephiston's soul. Power blasted into the material universe through the rift. A librarian of the Golden Suns died, his eyes bursting as flame consumed him from within. Racilis was driven to his knees, and he cried out in agony. Again that flicker of uncertainty, he looked out across the crystal cave, seeking out the weakness in the web.
Twice you have struck. Twice I remain unbowed. Now it is my turn.
Mephiston drew Vitaris. The silver steel of the blade blazed with heat. Baal, the home of Sanguinius and the Blood Angels chapter. For over 10,000 years, the tribes and clans of this world and its moons had given up their sons in the service of the Imperium. It was home to treasures and structures built by hands inspired by the great angel. Its rust-filled wastes, surviving its radiation, had made the people strong. It had made them survivors, but what was approaching was most likely the end of it all. In the cold, uncaring void of space, a sentience so enormous and hungry was heading for Mephiston's home. High Fleet Leviathan, a tendril of the swarm that was the great devourer, the Tyranids. It was seemingly ignoring other systems, biomass that could have been easy pickings. Instead, it was heading straight for Baal, as if a sentience that large had a personal grudge. Chapter Master Dante, the millennia-old legend, had sent out the call for all descendants and chapters of the Blood Angels to defend the birthplace of their gene sire, and they answered. In the grimdark future, there is only war, but underneath all that zealotry, stagnation and regression, there was hope. The scions of Sanguinius arrived in their thousands, men taught by different masters, raised on different worlds, taught in different creeds, armoured in different heraldry, set foot on the rusty sands of their gene sire's home. For the Lord of Death, librarians of numerous chapters gathered under his banner, though many of the other Adeptus Astartes met Mephiston with suspicion and exclusion. He was a legend, centuries old, but his reputation was notorious and revered. With all the various chapters of the Blood, they all had very different ideas, different views about the man who had come back from the Black Rage. Had he escaped the curse, or had he been abandoned by the righteous fury given to them by Sanguinius? Assembling before the legend, Chapter Master Dante, a near entire legion's worth of descendants of Sanguinius assembled. They dined together, drank together, emptied the coffers of their deepest vaults. They all shared in this moment of unity, even having their breath taken away by the priceless relics of Sanguinius himself. Even to Mephiston, and those seemingly most distant from their origin chapter, the sight caught their breath. To see the creations and last pieces of the human, the demigod, the great angel himself, you could imagine the reverence, the hope, the loyalty such things inspired. It was a melancholic celebration of all that they were. The High Fleet was coming, and a legion of angels were preparing to face it. No matter who the victor, Baal would be changed forever. Great battlements were erected across the various moons. Its people were enlisted, any resistance quashed. There was no space for kindness when the great devourer was coming. To Mephiston, his place would not be on the battlements beside his brothers. Ka'Bandha, the bloodthirster of Khorne, the demon who had even fought Sanguinius himself during the Horus Heresy, was coming. With so many of the Blood Angels and their successors in one place, the opportunity was too good to pass up. To face the incoming Tyranid High Fleet and the forces of Khorne would be the end of the line of Sanguinius. Mephiston asked his lord Dante if he was allowed to do everything necessary to save them. Dante agreed. Gathering many of the other librarians from other chapters, including Racilus and Antros, the task force rushed out towards the wastes of Baal. The skies above them were darkened, a headache so needle-sharp, splitting their heads, as the shadow in the warp produced by the hive mind dampened their powers. Disgusting, flying chitinous monstrosities harassed them on their way, concern washing over their ranks, until the Lord of Death lowered the rampart. Psychic wings sprouted from his back, and Vitaris ignited. Mephiston dove out, gliding through the air as an aspect of death, swatting down the foul Xenos that dared to get in their way. Safely passing through the swarms, the dozens of librarians approached the sacred grounds upon Baal. They delved deep into a cave system. Mephiston, Racilus, and Antros feeling themselves return to strength, as psychic power seemed to flow all around them, rejuvenating them. Hexagonal crystals, the colour of a deep crimson blood, jutted out from the walls, illuminating the space, until the group entered a large open cavern, with more of the bloodstone glittering on the ceiling. The librarians gathered to Mephiston, chief librarian of the Blood Angels. The Tyranids were coming for the material, but Ka'Bandha was coming for their souls. What they would do here was just as important. Today, they would stop Ka'Bandha from setting foot upon Baal. The librarians began to share their blood with each other, from flesh tearers, blood swords, golden suns, and blood angels. The librarians were bonded in a way deeper than any had been before. They were one. Brothers, lend me your art, Mephiston commanded, as they tore a wound in real space, creating a window into the warp itself. Amongst fire, skulls and rivers of blood, there he was, Ka'Bandha, bloodthirster of Khorne, staring back at the sons of Sanguinius. Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. Because if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you. To behold the enormous demon, your blood would begin to boil, your head would pound, and you would feel a creeping, hot rage flood your veins. You would be reminded of how very fragile and small you truly are. Staring directly into the abyss, Mephiston unleashed his power. Wings of black flame and veins of blood behind him. The demon began to taunt them, offering a place at Khorne's side. There was a darkness in their blood, waiting to be unleashed. They only needed to embrace what they truly were. The abyss was gazing back into them, but the librarians held. Finally, Mephiston ignited Vitaris, and once again angel and demon fought, a mirror of his gene sire 10,000 years before. The strikes were bone-shattering, as two creatures of darkness battled in hell. Even unleashing his enormous power, Mephiston was not immune to the influence of Khorne's realm. The feelings of hatred and anger trying to seep into his righteous power. The jewel was holding Ka'Bandha, but the efforts of the librarians began to falter. Antros, the youngest out of all of them, began to feel the influence of chaos upon him. spreading the weakness through the psychic link. Pain plunged through Racilis and the others. The rip into hell began to waver as Mephiston was beginning to be overwhelmed. Kabanda was too strong. Mephiston was pushed back, and the link was broken. Wounded and many dead, the cave had been shook by the battle, sealing them inside. They had done what they could, and now they hoped the delay had been enough. After digging their way through, Mephiston, Racilis, Antros, and the surviving librarians emerged onto the war-scarred surface of Baal. Tyranid corpses were everywhere. They looked to the stars and saw equally hope and despair. An enormous scar was blazed across the horizon, the Cicatrix Maledictum, a warp rift that cut the Imperium in two. But yet, amongst the stars, there was hope. An enormous Imperial fleet had roared into Baal's space. The Indomitus Crusade had arrived. Baal and its moons had been ravaged. Thousands of the chapters of Sanguinius were dead, strewn across the ancient holy sites and battlements. But then he arrived, a son of the Emperor, a Primarch, Rabute Gilliman of the Ultramarines. A figure of legend, brother of Sanguinius. Once again, a Primarch walked amongst the Imperium. By his side stood new, faster and stronger Space Marines, the Primaris, the next evolution of the Emperor's work. Thousands of Marines, created from the line of Sanguinius, marched forth, pledging their allegiance to Dante. To be in the presence of Lord Gilliman would be a treasure Mephiston would never forget. It hit like a physical wave, making even him want to kneel. The Blood Angels had been saved. Mephiston's efforts to delay Kabanda had pushed the demon's manifestation from the chapter fortress on Baal Secundus to Baal Primus. A mountain of Tyranid skulls in the shape of Kabanda's rune burned into the soul of all who looked upon it, a mockery to the Imperium on the surface of Baal Primus. Many of Mephiston's brothers would carry more than just physical wounds, burdened by the loss of so many men and so much history. But the least changed of them was Mephiston. Callisterius had stared into the abyss on Armageddon long ago. He had come back, someone else, the Lord of Death. Even if his memories were not his own, they were Callisterius's. It would have been Callisterius's deep sorrow, his hate, not Mephiston's, and what had been done to his brothers and the homeworld. With Baal saved, the chapter reborn, and their ranks replenished, Commander Dante was named Warden of Imperium Nihilus. The half of the Imperium cut off from the light of the Emperor's Astronomicon. The responsibilities of the chapter master had just increased exponentially. Along with that came the added weight to the shoulders of Mephiston, Dante's advisor and chief librarian. But with the disappearance of the demons and the retreat of the Tyranids, Mephiston found himself weakened. Something was wrong. The Blood Oath. The ancient battle bars drifted through Imperium Nihilus. Racilis entered Mephiston's personal chambers, finding a sight that was stomach-churning. A flayed man knelt in the center of the room, his skin splayed out into a maze, a star chart, whilst his mind rode the tides of the war. It was Mephiston, searching, scouring for the source of a psychic blindness he was suffering. Baal had been saved, but with the emergence of the massive warp tear across the galaxy, Mephiston's powers, his foresight, was dulled. He had begun to see ghosts, the numerous dead who had died in his service since becoming Mephiston. They gnawed at him, haunting his every step. Something was targeting him. Perhaps it was the architect of the events on Divinus Prime. He did not know. But what became clear in his divinations, the shadowy hand behind the scenes, the demon, had played a part in the creation of this cicatrix maledictum. Mephiston spent months searching for the source, doing battle across numerous worlds, finding no success, only walking away with a pendant he felt drawn to on some backwater planet, its significance lost to him. The path had finally led him to the world of Morses, but immediately upon arrival, the Blood Oath was attacked. The Necrons, the ancient Xenos of metallic skeletons who marched with the grace of automatons. Green plasma met the new heavy bolt guns of the Primaris-born Marines under Mephiston's command, but they kept coming until the Lord of Death entered the field. But rather than violence, he met them with their own principles. Mephiston invoked the Zanach tablets, the right to parley with the ruling Pharaon. The Necrons despised other Xenos as much as the Blood Angels, but they held their traditions in far higher esteem, something the well-read Mephiston knew he could exploit. The battle was halted, buying time for Mephiston and Raceless to descend down to the surface of Morses. As his chief librarian and mentor fought to cure the psychic blindness, another was on a trial of his own, a quest for knowledge, to save his lord from his escalating powers, Lucius Antros. The Sons of Helios Astartes chapter found a new brother amongst their ranks, as Antros sought to understand their unique strength in controlling and mitigating the psychic madness one should be experiencing living so close to the cicatrix maledictum. It was a redemption for his failures in the ritual on Baal against Kabanda, but most importantly, it was salvation for Mephiston, his friend and tutor, the one walking the path that could save the chapter. The sleepless mile, a mantra, a mental corridor, a deep meditation was the Sons of Helios' secret. We dream, dreaming, dreamed. The trance centered the individual, so much that in battle, when Lucius Antros lost himself to the Black Rage, the Sons of Helios brought him back, chanting, "We dream, dreaming, dreamed." Antros awoke. He was sane. The Black Rage had not been conquered, but pushed down. He also felt stronger than he ever had before, like he was a match to even the renowned veteran Raceless. It was a gift he was eager to bring back to his lord. Antros departed, aiming to meet his lord upon the Necron tomb world that was hiding secrets. Mephiston and Raceless found themselves upon a near lifeless world. Whatever beauty Morses had once held, it had been uprooted by the ancient horror that had awoken from the sands beneath. Only the scars of the Revenant Crusade remained, a failed recapture of the system. The Lord of Death, Raceless, and their squad began to explore the catacombs deep beneath the lifeless surface of Morses. There they found them, the last remnants of the Imperium, a sad and worn down people and a guard regiment. Many the children or grandchildren of those who had once lived upon the surface before the tombs had erupted from the sands long ago. The guard were in awe of the Space Marines, the Emperor's angels, yet they could not help but be afraid of the gaunt, unnerving figure of Mephiston. But even as he conversed with the brave Imperial holdouts, he saw them again. The shadows, the ghosts, a storm of dead soldiers only he could see. Often as a leader, the role is more than just orders. It is a performance, a confidence you must exude and spread to those around you. But Mephiston was struggling to maintain that facade, as the dead screamed in his head. The hallucinations had begun to cause him pain. His mind was not his, something that gravely concerned his friend Racilus, constantly telepathically reassuring his chief librarian. The forces of the Imperium delved further into the depths, closer to the tombs of the Xenos, Mephiston hypothesizing the source of his blindness to be the Necron Lord of this world. There they found them, the Necrons, battling against a group of pariahs to the surviving human Imperials, the Blister Men, enormous Ogrins who had inhabited the irradiated mineshaft since the fall of Morsus to the Xenos. Their skin had become dark and blistered, the scars of what remained in a place with radiation lethal to an ordinary human. The Imperials cursed and shunned them, but Mephiston did not. He summoned his psychic black wings and soared down towards the Necrons. Vibrant blood-red armor clashed against cold, green plasma, illuminated necrodermis. The Blister Ogrins looked upon Mephiston with wonder, rallying against the Xenos and smashing them with rusty old mining equipment. The Necron machines lay broken at their feet as the Ogrins stared in awe at Mephiston, one even daring to caress his face as though touching a prophet. Star Warrior, they called him, treating him with reverence and leading him towards their own territory. Mephiston, Racilus, and the Imperials strode into an enormous opening. It was a cathedrum, a place of beautiful carvings and polished stone, something unnoticed by the haunted Mephiston, as his determination to free himself from the ghosts was all-consuming. Before a great statue of a Star Warrior carved in red, the leader of the Blister Men welcomed their prophesied savior. But before the moment could be celebrated, the shadows again grew in Mephiston's mind. Pain seared through him. The ghosts had returned.
"We need you,"
said the voice. Racilus had materialized in a chair opposite Mephiston's. He looked around at the blazing, spherical chamber.
"You must come back to us, Mephiston. Even here you are not safe. Your power is still tearing you apart on Morsus. You are just averting your gaze. The only hope is to keep going, to reach the demon."
What do they want of me? With every day that passes, the dead scream louder in my face.
Mephiston gripped the locket as he spoke.
How can I find the demon when my mind is crowded with riches?
"What is that?"
asked Racilus. Mephiston shook his head.
Just a locket. I took it from one of the corpses on Hydra's ulterior. All these damned souls that hound me seem drawn to it. It enrages them.
"Then throw it away. Perhaps the ghosts will give you some peace then."
Mephiston shook his head.
The ghosts aren't real, Racilus. This isn't some kind of visitation. They are just the shadows of my mind. They can't be drawn to anything, and the locket seems significant. I don't know why. It reminds me of something in my past.
Racilus took the locket and looked at the blurry pict, badly reproduced and roughly fixed into the locket. The dead soldier who owned it had layered tape over the image in an attempt to preserve it from the mud and smoke of the trenches, but the figures were still almost faded from recognition because he had run his fingers over their faces so many times. It was a woman and two young children, smiling awkwardly, the guardsman's family, seeing him off to war.
Do you know who they are? After all the death I have left in my wake, why should this one image, perhaps they resemble my own family? I do not even recall what they look like. Do you? Do these people remind you of anyone?
Raceless shook his head, and a faint smile played around his lips.
It's not the people.
He held it up.
It's the background. Do you see? Behind them.
Behind the family, there was a small shrine. Mephiston's pulse raced. He had been so obsessed with trying to recognize the people, he had never noticed the shrine in the background, even though he had studied the locket countless times. He did recognize it. His subconscious had noticed something that his conscious mind had missed. It was a simple affair, just a winged skull crowned with a halo of spikes, but it triggered a powerful sensation in him. Hope.
Why?
He asked.
Why does it look so familiar? Why does it mean so much? Where is this?
Who knows? I doubt we've ever visited the place. It's the design you recognize. It is just like the shrine where I first saw you. As you are now, I mean. When you first told me your name was Mephiston. Surely you remember. The shrine in the Bactress Wastes where we swore our oath.
Oath?
Raceless's face remained impassive, but he could not hide the pain in his eyes.
Think. Cast your mind back. After you died and were reborn on Hades' Hive, when you became the Lord of Death, you swore never to forget yourself. You swore that, whatever happened, whatever power you gained, part of you would always remain Callisterius, and I swore to remind you when your memory failed.
Mephiston's thoughts traced back over all the wars he had prosecuted in pursuit of the demon, the terrible sacrifices he had demanded, the countless deaths he had caused. It had seemed as though nothing else mattered, but now, in the calm of the chemic spheres, he realized his destiny was more complicated than that. What use was killing monsters if he became one himself? He had forgotten his oath. Raceless knew him better than he knew himself. Mephiston held up his hands before his face, the red ceramite glittering in shifting light, and it looked as though his hands were wet with blood. He slumped back against the chair, shaking his head.
My memory has failed. I cannot be the man I was. He is gone, swallowed by the warp. Help me, Raceless. Be my memory. What would Calistarius have done if he were here now?
Raceless smiled.
Much as you are doing. He would be utterly focused on his goal, unwavering in his pursuit of his foe, but he would at least give these people a chance to hope. Reach their bomb, Calistarius. Trigger it. Why not? It will give us the chance we need to reach the Necron Lord and let you find out how he has blocked your vision. But it will also give the people of Morsus chance to show the Necrons they have a real enemy on this planet. There's no future for these people, but you could at least give them a chance to achieve something before they die. Hunt your demon without pause, yes, but inspire hope too, rather than despair.
He handed back the locket.
After all, who better to finish the Revenant Crusade than a Revenant?
Mephiston nodded. As he allowed the memory of the chemic spheres to fall away, he stared at the picture in the locket, determined to remember the man he once was, determined to breathe life into his corpse.
Do not leave me, Raceless,
he whispered back, as Morsus swam back into view. Mephiston gripped the hilt of Itaris, staring into the depths of his mind. For the first time in his life, he looked his accusers in the eye. The shadows that haunted him looked back in silence, the rage fading from their eyes. He was back on Morsus, standing before the cogitator, in the heart of the Ogryn's cathedrum. Raceless was at his side, and all the living souls in the nave were watching him. His tremors had vanished, and he could stand upright once more. Mephiston nodded, understanding the question in the ghost eyes, making them a silent promise. One by one, They nodded back, before slowly dissipating, snatched away by a breeze that sprang up from nowhere. For the first time in centuries, Mephiston's mind was silent. Thanks to the loyalty of Rassilus, he would keep his oath. Calm washed over him. He saw what he must do. He looked from face to face. It was a disparate bunch. From the charred, monstrous Ogryn, the survivors of the Sabine Guard, so skeletal they were swamped by their great coats, and his own battle brothers, standing proudly at his side, looking back at him from behind the tinted visors of their helmets.
If the Emperor demands a crusade,
Mephiston said quietly,
he shall have one. No more retreats. We will burn these mines clean.
Lorenz paled as she registered Mephiston's words, and passion flashed in her eyes.
For the Emperor,
said Rassilus, gripping his force sword and clanging the hilt against his chest armor. There was a moment of shocked silence, and then a chorus of voices, human and abhuman. For the Emperor, they cried, raising their weapons above their heads. For the Emperor. The Lord of Death ran, retreating into his mind palace. The dead were hounding him. Thousands of people had died around and in the service of Mephiston. It was war, and in this grim dark future, death was everywhere. He should be here. He shouldn't be hounded by the dead whilst on the trail of this demon, this architect of the events on Divinus Prime, and so much more. A locket he had picked up on Hydra's ulterior. Why had he done that? How it burned him that he could not discern why it felt so important. It was the background, a winged shrine with a halo of thorns. The same imagery of the ones in Hades' hive, the place where Calistarius had died and Mephiston had been born. Mephiston felt lost, swallowed by centuries of war. A drowning focus on the threats to the chapter and the Imperium. He had forgotten his oath, his memory had failed, but Rassilus was by his side. Whatever this power is, it must be tethered, tied to something human. Words Rassilus had said long ago, something Mephiston had faltered in. The people of Morsus were likely destined to die, but why not fight by their side? Why not give them hope? Hunt your demon without pause, yes, but inspire hope too, rather than despair. That was what this power was for. That was what Sanguinius meant to him, what he could mean to the ordinary people of the Imperium. I am the steel in the blade. I am the blood in the heart. I am the heat of the flame. I am the blood of Sanguinius. Rassilus would mean more to Mephiston than he could ever verbalize. His link to Calistarius and his greatest supporter. Even when the world and his chapter shunned him, Rassilus was by his side. Mephiston returned from his mind palace, declaring the rebirth of the Revenant Crusade. The Blister Ogryns, the Imperials, and the Blood Angels rallied. The ghosts faded from Mephiston's mind, satisfied that his oath was renewed, his power tied to something human once again. Hope. The statue of Red in the cathedrum was of a warrior with a burning sword. Even if in their ignorance the Ogryns had believed it to be Mephiston, it had still given them hope. It inspired them to keep fighting and to lay Promethean explosive inside the mines underneath the Necron tombs. Mephiston and Rassilus battled their way deeper into the cave systems, acting as the prophesied savior and saboteur as the brave Imperials bought them time with their lives. Necrons fell in their dozens to the Lord of Death, and the Blood Angels as scarabs, warriors, and cryptex met Vitaris. But there were losses, more added to the ghosts of dead that needed vindication. Mephiston alone was stable enough to continue, making his way into the largest of the tomb complexes, finding the source of his psychic blindness, which lay within. He could feel it, the Orchestrion, an ancient Necron device thrumming with power. It was the source Mephiston found, a relic of the Great War in Heaven that had awoken with the Tomb World and the Cicatrix Maledictum. A spindly Necron hovered over the device, noticing the slightly wounded human intrude upon this place. It prepared to strike until Mephiston began to speak. He feigned knowledge of the device and its history, piquing an interest in his Xenos counterpart. Clearly he wasn't the only one not meant to be here. He began to decipher the device's scripture, whilst attempting to appease and delay the threat beside him, the time ticking away. The Necron had clearly been stumped by the device. It was because it required a key it did not possess. Mephiston smiled, pouring his psychic powers into the ancient device. The Necrons on Morses began to convulse and explode. A source of bolstering power turned upon them as a Revenant completed the Revenant Crusade. Mephiston's psychic sight returned. His powers returned to their full strength. Mephiston opened his arms, embracing the shadows and dead, welcoming them as their Lord of Death, accepting what he was, their vindication, their hope. Upon returning to the Blood Oath in space, Mephiston and Raceless were reunited with Lexicanium Lucius Antros. Yet at the moment Antros was about to tell them of the Sleepless Mile, he hesitated. Doubt had seeped into his heart. Doubt born on Divinus Prime, and reinforced when he caught sight of Mephiston conversing with a vile Xenos Necron. Raceless tried to pry into his mind, but his power was greater. Blocking his mentor was child's play. Antros kept his knowledge to himself, sequestering himself alone and chanting the mantra that was his. We dream, dreaming, dreamed. The Lord of Death returns to Baal at the request of Dante, joining his lord as the Warden of Imperium Nihilus was preparing an enormous fleet to push back the tendrils of High Fleet Leviathan. Mephiston entered a trance, unleashing his psychic spirit into the warp, acting as a defensive measure against demons and creatures of that vile space. Travel outside of the Astronomicon of Terror was perilous, but the angels had a gift, the Sanguinor, a golden angel, a figure of legend that appeared in the chapter's most dire moments. In front of the fleet, the Sanguinor roared, acting as a guiding light, but it did not last. In the warp, Mephiston saw it, a dark angel, a mirror to the Sanguinor. It attacked its golden counterpart, their clashes ringing outwardly. Then it looked directly at him, the dark, hateful apparition. Dread washed over Mephiston, pushing him back into his corporeal body. The feelings of dread didn't quite leave him, as he saw one of their ships fall behind, now prey to the creatures of the warp. Giving the news to his lord, Dante plunged the fleet back into real space. They would not leave such a vital asset behind. Mephiston, Dante, Raceless, and their accompanying Primaris armoured up, boarding the eerie, silent ship. Mephiston asked his lord if he should stay behind, concerned for his injuries that had not healed since the devastation of Baal. But they pressed on. Dante would not show weakness. Blood and taint were speckled across the dark steel halls of the ship, the crew seemingly suffering a fate too horrific for words. Further they pushed until they saw it, a pillar of convulsing flesh, an effigy forged of the missing crew. The warp began to blur over real space. Demons began to chant and cry, until through a tear it walked through, a towering, sensuous beast, gracefully clawing its way in. Its very presence would cause lesser beings to writhe in madness and pleasure. Quirinus the Perverse, a greater demon of Slaanesh. Honeyed words trailed forth, offering temptation, freedom from the black rage. If only they became the champions of Slaanesh. Mephiston and Dante rejected the demon's false promises, igniting a battle between the blood angels and demons. Mephiston flew at Quirinus, matching the titanic power it exuded, much to the shock of Dante. Just how powerful had he become? Mephiston's power was so great that it kept growing and growing, fueled by the warp pouring through the tear. Black flames and arcs of blood roared around this aspect of death. Even above him, a shadow formed of a dark angel, matching his strikes. Dante and Mephiston in unison struck out, banishing the demon back to hell. But the surroundings were still shaking. Dante and Racelus pleading for Mephiston to stop. "Help me," Mephiston cried out, losing control on a scale never before. "Kill me," Mephiston screamed. His power was consuming him until Dante knocked him out cold. The Lord of Death was taken away, placed within a sarcophagus, just as when he had joined the chapter. Even under the greatest wards on Baal, his power leaked out. He could hold back the power no longer. Racelus, with deep sorrow in his heart, he knew what had to be done next. But hope arrived from the forges of Mars, a salvation that held his life in the balance.
Commander Dante,
He said. He sat back and tugged a black silk cloth over the bowl, hiding it. Dante descended the last few steps into Mephiston's living quarters. The other lit platforms orbited the man like a model of a planetary system.
Chief Librarian,
Dante took a chair at the opposite end of the table.
you have returned from the chemic spheres.
my brother librarians deemed me safe to be let free. I concurred.
Tell me how you fare.
Dante examined him carefully. Mephiston's appearance had changed again, and was now much as it had been before. His skin was still ghostly pale, his eyes piercing, his face too sharp and intent to express the beauty inherent to its features. He was a little bigger, a little taller, but the same grave cold emanated from him, the same deep sense of unease, the same immense power.
As you see, I am calm. The sense of power outstripping my control is gone.
He held up his arm. The robe he was wearing fell back from milk-white skin. The black carapace appeared like a series of massive bruises beneath.
There is not a mark upon me.
There is not,
said Dante.
Does this trouble you?
Asked Mephiston.
Should it, brother?
Mephiston looked down at his book and traced the ancient words with his fingers.
You have never truly trusted me since I ceased to be Calistarius and became what I am.
It is not a lack of trust. You are a noble warrior, and my brother,
said Dante.
Then you fear me?
I fear nothing,
said Dante. Mephiston looked up and smiled. His teeth were perfect, white as snow.
You fear what I might become, what it might mean for the chapter. I do too, but I am in control of myself. The incident aboard the Dominance will not be repeated.
Are you sure?
I am sure,
said Mephiston. He spread his hand, palm up, and looked at it.
I am made anew.
Physical strength is commendable, but what of your soul, brother? Is that too fortified? If not, then your enhanced physiology only makes you a greater threat.
There is more to this body than the added strength Cole's servant gave me.
Mephiston frowned thoughtfully, choosing his words with care.
I do not think my self-control comes from the change.
From where, then?
I saw him, or something that could be regarded as him.
Who?
Our father,
said Mephiston simply.
I sense something in you. You too have changed since Leviathan fell upon us. You saw our father too.
Sanguinius,
said Dante.
I did have a vision.
Dante stared into Mephiston's eyes.
I was on the verge of death. I think I would have died if he had not sent me back.
I saw something similar. A choice was given to me.
Then you are more fortunate. No such offer was made to me.
Dante spoke neutrally, but he could not hide his rancor from Mephiston.
You are ready to rest,
said Mephiston.
I have seen more war than any being should have to. There is little in my life but despair.
What we saw, both of us, it could not be Sanguinius. He is dead. He has been dead for 9,000 years,
said Mephiston.
What then? Is it more likely our sense of duty brought us back?
Possibly.
Duty is my undoing.
Dante paused.
Could it have been him? Could he persist somehow in the warp?
Mephiston shrugged.
Sanguinius is recorded as being one of the Emperor's most psychic sons. Would that have been enough? As far as it is understood to us, a powerful soul might persist in the warp for a time, but they are never whole, never what they were in life. Eldari lore is rich with horrible tales about what occurs to the dead.
Mephiston stood.
If we take a radical step and assume that what we saw could possibly be our Lord and Father, then we must ask ourselves why he has not shown himself to us before.
You do not think it was him?
I could not be certain.
Then you do not believe.
The warp is a strange place beyond the understanding of mortals.
He closed his book and took it to the bookcase.
When we begin to think we understand it, that is the first step on the path of damnation. It is illusion. Everything the warp gives us is a lie of one kind or another. It cannot be trusted in any way.
Mephiston gave one of his rare smiles.
Even trusting that it cannot be trusted.
Cannot be trusted,
said Dante.
I was going to say, is folly,
said Mephiston.
But you are correct.
Mine is not the most poetic of phrases.
It is possible to try too hard for beauty in everything,
said Mephiston. He slid the book back into position with a soft thump.
What will you do with me, my lord? I do not want to be left behind when we attack Keru.
It is time for a little honesty among friends. You may yet be a risk to the chapter.
I do not feel I am, brother.
Even so, I will not deploy you in Keru. Not yet. Although you appear completely in control of yourself, we must test you in battle. If your abilities still outmatch your discipline, and you manifest the same devastating effect on the warriors of our chapter, I would rather it were somewhere far from Baal itself. Keru can wait a few weeks more. Shortly before we decided to test Cole's procedure on you, a ship arrived in the system with a sole survivor upon it, the son of the deceased governor of Ranenti.
I have never heard of it.
They have not requested the aid of our chapter for over 4,000 years. Peaceful until now. It is not far, one of the hundreds of systems to the north of the Scar. The world has been overwhelmed by a gene-stealer uprising. If we do not cut off their psychic call, the Tyranids will fall upon Renenti and devour it. And if the High Fleet in this subsector turns towards Renenti, they will bypass the trap we have laid for them. We will go there together. I wish to see you fight with my own eyes.
If there is an effect on the warriors of our blood, my lord, you will be in danger.
I have lived too long as it is, Mephiston. I have never shied from duty. If you do lose control, if you show signs of turning into a threat, then I will end you myself.
I understand.
Dante stood.
We will depart tomorrow for Skyfall. There will be a small contingent, you, me, and a handful of men. For the rest, we shall rely on the Imperial fleet. See that you are ready.
Dante looked to the armorer on the platform.
New armor. A gift from Incariel of the Blade. My old battleblade no longer fits.
Until tomorrow, then.
As you command.
The bravest sight in the world is to see a great man struggling against adversity. A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials. If you really want to escape the things that harass you, what you're needing is not to be in a different place, but to be a different person.
Mephiston's mind drifted in the warp. He found himself upon a world that looked so much like home. He saw the simple rags he was dressed in, the stained glass he used to carry around his neck. He was Kali once again, a child of Baal Primus, the boy who had never heard music, staring into the irradiated rust wastes of his once home. It was an illusion, a warp-manifested facade. A hunched, malnourished figure began to mock him. It was the old man who had saved him from his violent father, the man who had nurtured his raw psychic powers. The ratty old man began to taunt him for his lack of manners, insolent as ever. The Lord of Death, Kali, Callisterius, Mephiston. He had worn many names. How many would he die with? In the material universe, Mephiston's body lay upon an operating table, undergoing the crossing of the Rubicon Primaris. His skin and bones were being lengthened. New organs were being placed inside his body, as Dante, Raceless, and dozens of other librarians and sanguinary guard watched over in vigil. They were attempting to save him, to help him contain his power in an upgraded, stronger form. Kali, Callisterius, Mephiston, the being's souls were in the warp, residing in a pocket of calm that his once mentor's soul called home. The old man led him into a cave, Mephiston finding it full of polished, reflective surfaces within, each reflecting back every stage of Mephiston's life. He came face to face with one, seeing the beautiful, warm, sculpted features of Callisterius, contrasted with his own gaunt, waxy corpse-like visage. Who was Mephiston? A revenant of Kali and Callisterius? How much had been lost in order for the Lord of Death to rise? Mephiston moved further, approaching a precipice. Once again he saw the two angels of the warp, fighting like titans of myth. One gold, one black. A figure before him began to coalesce, a space marine silhouette entirely filled with crimson blood. Mephiston asked why he was here. What did this figure want with him? Words spilled forth of a truth that slowly became more and more real for Mephiston. The bloody marine spoke of the warring angels, each the amalgamation of the chapter's deeds, a psychic wound that seeped into Baal from the warp, an imprint put upon the past, present, and future of all who resided there. The golden angel was the purity of the chapter. The black angel was the flaw. A war kept in balance by each act of beauty and fall to the black rage. The angel of darkness was winning. It was a flaw in their souls, brought about by a grim dark future. The bloody marine offered Mephiston a choice, just as Sanguinius had been offered a choice millennia ago. Become the avatar of the Black Angel. Mirror the sanguinor of the Golden Angel. Embody all the flaws, hatred, and darkness within his brothers' souls. This was why he was born on Armageddon. The truth he had been seeking for centuries. Mephiston was a part of this Dark Angel. But he now, right now, was given a choice. He asked, what if he refused? What if this centuries-old veteran had earned some rest? What if he had given enough? If he refused, he would die, as his body was dying right now. If he accepted, he would become more of a pariah. He would be damned to become the Dark Angel. His brothers would hate him even more and not know why. But he would buy the chapter time they did not have. Was it even a choice at all? He refused. He had given enough. The figure of blood began to transform. Golden luscious hair flowed down. Gorgeous white wings sprouted from his back. Sanguinius. Mephiston fell to his knees as he saw his lord, his gene father, his god. It was his choice, self-doom, but salvation for his brothers, or freedom, but the death of the sons of Sanguinius. In the Arx Angelicum on Baal, the surgery was complete, but Mephiston was dead. They couldn't resuscitate him. His friend Albinus kept trying, but a bloody corpse, stitched and cut, remained still. Panicking, they tried to restart his heart with enormous pulsating current that sent Albinus flying. Mephiston awakened. He was a shadow and flame, lifting into the air. A tornado of fire and psychic energy began to tear the room into pieces. Mephiston's body began to lift. Mephiston's body was alive. As his soul roared into his body, a black angel manifested behind him, screaming hatred and pain into the witnessing blood angels. Then it stopped. The energy began to flood into Mephiston, absorbed into a now serene and calm figure. The bravest sight in the world is to see a great man struggling against adversity. A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials. If you really want to escape the things that harass you, what you're needing is not to be in a different place, but to be a different person. Chapter Master Dante alone met with Mephiston inside his chambers. The Lord of Death seeming serene, in control, stronger and better in his new Primaris frame. Mephiston was different. Just as how he had evolved from Callisterius, this new being had evolved from Mephiston, an avatar of the Dark Angel. He chose not to go gentle into that good night. He would rage against the dying of the light. Mephiston knew that even Dante feared him. He couldn't help it. They both spoke of what they had seen when death had nearly claimed them both, their gene sire, Sanguinius, though Dante was jealous for the fact Mephiston had been given a choice to return. Ronetti would be the testing ground for the reborn Chief Librarian, burning to the ground the Gene Stealer uprising with an ease and dispassion that felt like a god walking amongst men. With the approval of Dante, they returned to Baal, enacting a ceremony for the fallen who had been taken by Mephiston's violent psychic rebirth. He felt their eyes upon him as he read the funerary rites. in part judging and accepting. His power came from Sanguinius, but it was the power of their flaws. Following the ceremony, Dante, Albinus, Mephiston, Racilus, and Antros convened the Prospero system, decades of work that had begun since Divinus Prime, which led Mephiston, Racilus, and Antros to this answer: a relic. Sabasis. The comment caught Mephiston by surprise. His powers and gift in psychic foresight were far beyond his brother librarians. It should not have been possible for Antros to read the inscription upon this relic. Even his psychic probing was rebuffed. Antros was powerful beyond his expectations. Sabasis was where the answers they sought were, and perhaps more information of this demon that had been playing in the background and shadows. The one Mephiston had chased since Divinus Prime and Morsus. Dante agreed to let them go, commenting how Mephiston was never alone with a friend like Racilus, something that made the veteran librarian beam with silent pride. Once again in the deepest vaults, upon the still rebuilding Baal, Mephiston, Racilus and Antros met with the most dangerous prisoner the chapter had, the Octo Calavarii, that manipulative, immortal, chitinous Xenos. Mephiston began to interrogate it once again, preening information about Sabasis and the Prospero system. They needed to cross the Great Rift into the region of influence of the Thousand Sons Legion, the sons of Magnus the Red. Mephiston, Racilus and Antros prepared to leave, but before they departed, Mephiston gifted Antros an ancient staff of the chapter as a reward for his accomplishments and abilities. The three left Baal as the Octo Calavarii was laughing, knowing what was coming for them, thinking of the demon with a bird's mask. Mephiston watched Fedorak begin to stir. The colonel was strapped to a table in a small, shuttered room. There were just a few fingers of light spilling around the shutters to reveal that it was still daylight outside.
By the throne,
said Fedorak as he woke, straining against his bonds, trying to rise.
What is this? Who would dare do this to me?
His rage faltered as he noticed Mephiston standing a few feet away. He slumped back against the table, the whites of his eyes gleaming from the sickly yellow pallor of his face. Mephiston crossed the room towards him, his armor purring with electromagnetics. He leant over the table and unfastened the restraints. Fedorak winced as blood rushed back into his arms and legs. He patted the limbs as he sat up, and then managed to climb slowly down from the table, his legs numb and clumsy.
This is an outrage. You have no right to treat me in such a way.
Asturia,
replied Mephiston. Fedorak shook his head.
What?
The painting you found in the mess hall. It is a rare treasure, painted by an artist called Asturia. It is uniquely beautiful and unusually accurate. You were right to be impressed.
Fedorak looked even more baffled.
How do you know about that?
Asturia knew the Emperor of Mankind,
continued Mephiston, ignoring Fedorak's question.
He personally observed several key engagements at the very dawn of the Imperium. The intensity of vision you notice is extraordinary insight, stems from the fact that he knew his subject. The determination you saw in that image, that refusal to accept defeat, is no simple trick of the artist. It affected you so profoundly because it is the truth. Truth is always beautiful, and beauty is always powerful.
Fedorak massaged his temples and stared at the floor.
Am I still dreaming? How can you know what I thought, what I saw?
I am a librarian. Things that are hidden from others are made clear to me.
Mephiston shrugged.
To be fair, even a psyker of moderate abilities could see what's in your mind. Revelation shines out of you like a beacon. It's part of the reason I spared your life.
Spared my life?
Fedorak limped away from the table, looking around for his weapons.
What are you talking about?
You saw a demon.
Mephiston spoke in calm, neutral tones, but the words resonated, catching Fedorak's breath in his throat.
Demon?
He sneered.
What do you mean? You talking about fairy tales?
Demons exist. The name is perhaps misleading. It conjures up unhelpful connotations. But there are entities in the warp that hunger for your soul, Colonel Fedorak. Beings of etheric force that desire a foothold in reality. They wish to escape from their protean hells and enter our galaxy. And here, in the Prospero system, they have almost succeeded.
Mephiston did not need seer sight to know what Fedorak was thinking. The terror was clear in his eyes. Fedorak stared at him.
Why? Why are you telling me all this?
Because there is a demon on this world, and I need your help in finding it.
Fedorak was unable to speak for a moment, shaking his head and mouthing silent words. Then he looked at the table.
Why did you strap me down?
You were not yourself.
Mephiston wrenched the shutters open, flooding the room with light and heat.
You attacked your comrade. I might have killed him if Raceless had not intervened.
Sergeant Malik?
Fedorak sounded horrified. He shielded his eyes from the glare as sunlight flashed across Mephiston's battle plate.
Is he hurt?
Fedorak was a good man. Mephiston had sensed that even before he dragged his thoughts. He was gruff and brittle, and he had spent many years battling a faithlessness that ate into him like a cancer. But he cared for his men, and he would die for them if he had to. Mephiston had spent the last few hours striving for his sanity because he held vital information about Zadkael. But he also felt a grudging affinity for a man who had battled so much doubt and madness so as not to fail his men. Fedorak was looking at the floor and muttering quickly to himself, growing increasingly agitated, massaging his face as though trying to remove a mask.
Like a bird's skull. A mask, like a bird's skull.
His words rose in pitch and desperation until he seemed on the verge of crying out.
Zephyr.
Mephiston said the word quietly, and Fedorak immediately relaxed, ceasing his muttering and taking a deep breath. Zephyr was an old Baalite word. Mephiston had dragged it from his own hazy recollected childhood. It had no innate significance to Fedorak, but Mephiston had planted verbal triggers in the Colonel's subconscious, ways to redirect his thoughts from memories of the demon. There was no telling how long the wars would hold. Fedorak's memories of Zadkael would loop tirelessly until they found a chink in the armor Mephiston had made, and then Fedorak's sanity would fold, leaving him incapable of rational thought. He might last months, years even, but eventually the pain would be too great.
You are lucky. Not many mortals come so close to a creature of the warp and survive as long as you have.
Fedorak glanced at him. He was fully awake now, and his eyes were sharp.
I won't survive though, will I? I can feel the wound in my thoughts.
You have some time remaining to you. Which of us can say more than that?
Fedorak sat heavily on a chair and cradled his head. After a while, he seemed to recover his composure and looked up at Mephiston.
Thank you for whatever you did. Tell me how I can return the favor.
This sector is no longer under Imperial control. You are a lone outpost. You will soon fall.
Fedorak nodded.
Which is why no one heard our calls for help.
I heard your call, Colonel. That cannot be an accident. You called, I came, and I met the one man on this planet who can lead me to my prey. If you had not seen Asturia's painting, you would not have survived to meet me. And if you had not survived to meet me, I might have lost my way.
Then the Emperor brought us together. He's watching over us.
Mephiston shrugged.
Or is it the skill of Asturia we should be thanking? The power of human endeavor and creativity. Is that what the Emperor means? Is he our better instincts? Is he the spark of genius that gives us hope and drives us on when we are about to accept defeat?
Fedorak shook his head.
I saw something more than a painting.
Who knows what you really saw? Conversation for another time. I have come here seeking the being that drove you to pull that gun on yourself. I have to find it. I have to stop it. Or that madness you feel twisting in your thoughts will soon infect the entire galaxy.
It feels like watching a fire from a distance. I see the light, the silhouettes that dance around it, basking in it. I yearn for the heat, for the warmth I once held so dear. I can almost feel its embers in my chest. I thought it would always be a part of me, but now I squint as the flames seem more distant, further and further from my reach. This is the price for the burden I bear, the price of power.
Sabassus, a lost imperial world, clouded under the influence of the warp within the Prospero system. Mephiston, Racilus, and Antros searched for a way to traverse the Cicatrix Maledictum, a journey that brought them to the husk of a long-dead Eldari craft world. They found themselves set upon by illusions. Even their Thunder Hawk was struck. Mephiston, now in control of his power, unleashed it. He froze time within the pocket of the ship, debating whether to heal the shattered skull of their pilot. The Primaris frame was truly extraordinary, allowing him to unlock the true potential of his power, the power of Sanguinius. Mephiston chased down this puppet master, finding that a foul Eldari was the source. It was at his mercy, but he began to bargain with it, threatening to bring the eyes of the Imperium upon this hallowed ground, unless it granted him access to their hidden paths, the Webway, a bypass for the Cicatrix Maledictum. The alien agreed. The Blood Oath roared into the Prospero system, finding the nearly lost Imperial jungle world of Sabassus. Mephiston, Racilus, Antros, and the Blood Angels descended down from the sky, finding the last Imperial outpost under siege, preparing for their last stand against the forces of the Chaos Cult. The terrified, exhausted people of Sabassus were awaiting their deaths, only to find the Angels of Death knocking at their door. Their prayers to the Emperor had been answered, as warriors in beautiful vermilion red armor strode in. Colonel Fedorak, the Imperial Guard commander, began to greet the warriors, until his mind snapped. He awoke, strapped down upon a table, saved from attacking his friend by the enormous, bulky figure in the corner of the room. Mephiston stared back at the mortal, his aesthetics no doubt inspiring equal parts dread and hope. Before his return to the city and its last stand, Colonel Fedorak had seen something horrific, that had happened upon one of the 9 finger-shaped mountains of Sabasis. He had seen a demon with a bird skull mask, a sight that would crack the sanity of any mortal, and eventually his. Fedorak had been a man on the edge of giving up, even before, his sanity only saved by the painting that hung in his quarters. An Astria original, a glorious rendition of the Emperor of Mankind during the dawn of the Great Crusade, millennia ago. The determination, the hope, captured in the Emperor's eyes had acted like a bandage upon his psyche, something Mephiston reinforced, saving his life. Even when he had been Calistarius, Mephiston, as a blood angel, was no stranger to art. His chapter was steeped in it. Many times, in all his lives, there had been a paintbrush or a chisel replacing a sword in his hand. He understood Astria's work, for he knew that look in the Emperor's eyes, because truth was always beautiful. Fedorak had seen the demon, the one whom Mephiston had been chasing now for centuries, and Fedorak would lead them to it. To the mountains of Sabasis, Mephiston and Raceless traversed, leaving Antros behind, much to the Lexicanium's frustration. With Fedorak at the Blood Angel's side, they retreaded the Colonel's steps, finding the remnants of the demonic rituals the Colonel had witnessed before. The group found their way into a temple. They began approaching what appeared to be a ritual site. The uneasiness they were all feeling was broken, as they were ambushed by the demon Mephiston had been chasing for centuries, Zadkael, a greater demon of Tzeentch. From their flanks strode forth Baroque, cobalt blue, and gold-powered armor, the near automatons that were the traitorous Thousand Sons of Magnus the Red. The battle ignited, with Raceless and the Primaris Blood Angels engaging the Thousand Sons, and Mephiston rushing towards the ritual site at the center. It was glowing hot, searing with heat. The mountains began to shake, all 9 of the finger-shaped peaks. They were not mountains, they were towers of Tzeentch, bled into from the warp. The Lord of Death, with fire and plasma all around him, encased his body around the ritual site. He tapped into the full power as the avatar of the Black Angel. Now in his Primaris frame, he split himself. He bound his body to the ritual beacon, using his corpse to insulate and delay it. He sent his consciousness into his friend Raceless to aid his brother, and his soul, chasing after the demon into the warp. He awoke to a landscape without physical or temporal boundaries, a vast, formless limbo with colors and shapes impossible to describe. A figure stood up. It was a mass of charred muscle, coated in a crust of dark, dried blood, with raptor-like claws, glowing red eyes and wings. This was the true form of the being Mephiston, his soul. He was a creature that seemed to fit into the smattering of bizarre, twisted abominations that roamed this bizarre place. He was confused, disorientated. His memory was fractured. He was someone. He was chasing something. He followed the creatures around him, joining a seeming exodus of twisted monstrosities, all towards the city of light. In their thousands they travelled, abominations, all hoping to join the Crimson King, Magnus the Red, in his utopia for psychers, the hulking, nightmarish creature that was Mephiston. Along the mind-breaking, impossible paths of the warp, stood before the city of light, ancient, broken Prospero. he broke his way in, slaughtering vile demonic creatures in his path. A crumbling ruin, where the echoes of ghosts from the Horus heresy met him. Slowly his memory was returning, as did his surety of his task, and his target. But his prey was not the one being hunted. Lured into a tower, Mephiston walked straight into the demon's ambush. He was stabbed by a ritual knife and locked in place. Zadkiel cackled in triumph. Over a century of manipulation and scheming had come to pass. Divinus Prime, Morsis, the Cicatrix Maledictum, and now he had him, the perfect conduit, to enact a ritual to bring the City of Light back into real space. On Sabasis, Antros defied Mephiston's orders, travelling to the summit of one of the 9 Finger Mountains. The young Lexicanium, student of Mephiston, still caught by the righteousness of youth, thought he was saving them. But when he arrived, his body began to change. It started to twist and contort. The sleepless mile, the path that had brought him back from the Black Rage, was not born of the sons of Helios, but of Zadkiel, a ritual of Tzeentch. Antros cried out in pain. He had been tricked. He had betrayed everything. His chapter, his friends. He had betrayed Mephiston. As his sanity was moments away from being swallowed by the creature he would become, he looked into the staff his lord had gifted them before they left Baal. It clicked, and he understood what he had to do. With the last part of him human, Antros polarized the ritual, drawing upon it as a vessel, taking his lord's place and his life with it. Raceless, with nearly every blood angel with him, either wounded or dead, looked to the smoking shell that was Mephiston. The Lord of Death had returned, and he stared back. His armor was smoking and burnt, but he was whole. The mountains outside had vanished, and Sabasis was at peace. Returning back to Baal, Mephiston and Raceless sat in Lucius Antros's personal chambers, remembering their friend. With his Primaris form, Mephiston had not just been restored, he had been elevated, just like when Callisterius had been elevated to Mephiston. His power was incredible, great enough to see the taint residing in Antros's heart, the taint of the Sleepless Mile. It feels like watching a fire from a distance. I see the light, the silhouettes that dance around it. I thought it would always be a part of me, but now I squint as the flames seem more distant, further and further from my reach. This is the price for the burden I bear, the price of power. The somber, Raceless asked if Mephiston could have saved Antros. Why had he let himself be stabbed by Zadkiel? If Antros had needed to die in the polarizing of the ritual, Mephiston told him that he had saved him. A flash of anger rose in Raceless and then faded. The Lord of Death was so powerful, and with that elevation came an even greater distance from his friends, from his student, from his humanity. He watched them like silhouettes around a flame, distant, now far away from their warmth. Did he even mourn Antros, or was he even capable of it? Could the avatar of the Black Angel, the symbol Mephiston, care for one being? The centuries-old librarian sat in peace. He had endured so much. He let his mind drift as he sketched. He looked down at his work, seeing, like Astria, A sketch of the Emperor, those powerful, determined, hope-filled eyes staring back. Is this how he felt? How Sanguinius felt? A protector of humanity, but destined to be on the sidelines, its observer, never quite feeling its warmth again. The Lord of Death, Calistarius, Mephiston, the Black Angel, stood up, striding out, ready to fight the enemies of the Imperium until he could no more. His destiny was doomed to become the embodiment of the Black Angel, but until that day, he would rage against the dying of the light.
Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight and learned too late they grieved it on its way, do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men, near death, who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage against the dying of the light.